speak to the issue of the Chernofski dig site and the other digs that have gone on in the last couple of years. I'm speaking tonight as a representative of the, also as a representative of the Holy Ascension Church here in Unalaska, as the president of the Church Council. I am, as you know, many of you know, I'm the chair of OC and also the mayor of the city of Unalaska. But primarily my interests are, after talking with Chris Price last week, the recovery and burial of the artifacts of the people from Chernofski. I think that as a community, there are several families in Unalaska that have moved from Chernofski after the war and into Unalaska, Kashiga, and Makushin, and to Unalaska eventually. We have several families that are related to people in Chernofski. So I look forward to working with your group and the museum and the tribe of Unalaska, the community of St. Paul, who owns Tunagusik, who owns the land at Chernofski, to work with them that we intern our people back into our community of Unalaska. And I look forward to the presentation you have this evening, and I'll answer any questions you may have through the process. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. That was really helpful and really informative. I think next I'd ask Kendall Campbell, our tribal liaison for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to take a moment to give a brief introduction. Kendall, are you available?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Perfect. And thank you so much for the opportunity. And thank you, Mayor, for your words beforehand. I just wanted to take a few moments to express our gratitude and thanks for this opportunity to share with you this evening. In particular, I want to thank Kelly and the Kalawingam tribe for the efforts that they put into making this happen and available to such a wide audience. We really hope to begin to and continue to provide these kinds of opportunities that allow us to share information and have open discussion, particularly in areas of importance to the Alaska Native peoples. This is important to us not only in strengthening our government-to-government relationships with the tribes of Unalaska, but also in strengthening our relationships with the community. We recognize and respect our government-to-government responsibilities and our trust responsibilities to the tribes, and this is just one small piece of our efforts in hoping that we can meet that responsibility and share with you this evening. In addition, I'd like to say we hope that in the future we can do this in person. We recognize that all of the communities of Alaska are being hit very hard by the COVID pandemic, and we want to take a moment to just thank you for being with us this evening and hope and express our gratitude that you're here with us, and hope that you are all well and continue to stay well. Thank you, Kelly. That's all I have.
All right. Thank you so much, Kendall. So what I'd like to do now is start the formal presentation. I'll be going first with a discussion of the archaeology of Chernofski, reporting on what our contractors were able to do in 2019. One of the other things that I wanted to make sure to point out is that this presentation wouldn't be happening without the efforts and the help of the Kalawingam Tribe of Unalaska and KUCB. So thank you to both of those organizations for your assistance with this and your technical problem solving. It's much appreciated. Okay, so moving on to it, the archaeological investigations at Chernofski Harbor. And before we start, questions are definitely welcome. I'm hoping to hold off until the end of each presentation to answer questions or comments that have risen during the presentation, but definitely feel free to shout out if you can't hold back. And do please mute your mic. So when you do have a question, remember to unmute your mic. And I think that'll keep the technological side of this moving smoothly. All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Let me know if you can't. So today I'm going to be talking about the 2019 archaeological investigations that the Army Corps of Engineers, USACE, conducted at Chernofski Harbor, specifically at Mutton Cove in Chernofski Harbor. We've been doing work there under the Formerly Used Defense Sites program, which is a program geared to clean up environmental contamination left over from military operations in the past. Some of the things that we did included mapping and excavation at the Chernofski village site. And those numbers, UNL 34, for example, that's the state designation identifier. So if you see those, just know it's a state number, and that's just another way to identify the site. We also tested and evaluated the historic significance of another site in Mutton Cove, two sites actually, the UNL 160 site and Mutton Cove Hill site. And we did architectural recordation of 3 World War II collapsed buildings and a tank farm. And then we also, of course, had archaeological monitoring of FUDS cleanup work that was occurring later that summer. And the reason behind these actions, or I should say the reason why we chose to do these certain actions, was based off of a memorandum of agreement between the USACE, the Alaska State Historic Preservation Officer, the SHPO, the Tanagusit Corporation, Cora Holmes, and the Russian Diocese of Alaska. This MOA we signed in 2018, and the development of this MOA also relied heavily on our concurring parties to the document, which included the Kawangan Tribe of Unalaska, the Aleut community of St. Paul Island, Unalaska Corporation, and the Aleut Corporation. We were happy to have the Aleutian Pribilof Islands Association, APIA, also help with the development. And the MOA identified the different archaeological tasks that the USACE should be doing, and that's what the 2019 actions were. So for those of you who haven't had the pleasure of going out to Chernofski Harbor, this is a view of Mutton Cove looking at the isthmus. So the water that you see in front of you is Mutton Cove, Chernofski Harbor, and then behind the land is the Bering Sea. So a brief history about Chernofski. First few decades of the 20th century, the Chernofski community had to deal with the decimation of local sea otter and sea lion populations, as well as epidemics, including a deadly influenza epidemic in 1919. Because of these, in 1928, the last permanent residents of Chernofski relocated to places like Kashiga and Unalaska, as the mayor stated earlier. In 1919, a ship ranch was started up in Mailboat Cove, which is just across the way from Mutton Cove, and that ranch remained active. And I'm sure many of you have read Cora Holmes' book about the Holmes family work at the ranch. They were the only permanent residents in that area until 1997. And Mailboat Cove, where the ranch is still seasonally occupied by Art Christensen, who spends a lot of time out there. Today, most of the land around Mutton Cove, where the village of Chernofski was, is owned by Tanagusit Corporation of St. Paul Island. Other landowners do include the Orthodox Church of America, the Holmes family, and the Aleut Corporation. And as you can see from these historical photos, in 1895, or about 1895, and in 1909, it was a pretty large community. We know from oral histories, from elders, and from Russian archival records that Chernofski was a bustling community in the 1790s. Father Veniaminov, or Saint Innocent, visited Chernofski in the 1820s and 1830s, and his diaries described the community at that time. One of the things that we didn't know before starting this project was how long people had been living at Chernofski. And we knew it was a really long time, obviously, but we were hoping to figure out an actual date. For example, when Dr. Doug Veltri first saw Chernofski in 1986, he wrote that it was likely originally one of the largest sites in the Aleutians. So this is a really important area to a lot of people. It has a really deep history. The site has been significantly impacted by World War II construction and contamination. And since we are, as an agency, trying to clean up that contamination, we knew we'd probably impact this village site. So that is why we had initiated that consultation with the landowners and descendant communities that resulted in the MOA in 2018. All right. So in 2019, we hired a crew of 7 archaeologists to go out and spend almost 2 full months out in Chernofski excavating at the site. They ended up excavating 10 square meters, and the greatest depth they formally excavated to was 2 meters, which is 6.5 feet deep. And then they were able to do some soil borings to try and identify how deep the cultural materials went. And it seems like the site is probably deeper than 4.5 meters in some places, so deeper than 15 feet. So that's more than 15 feet of accumulated history, which is pretty amazing. And just to give you guys a better example, or a better view, I should say, of the village site itself, in 2019, one of the things we did was take a bunch of aerial imagery, and we were able to create these terrestrial digital elevation models to use color to show the different elevation, the different heights of the land. And that bright green round area, and then the slightly lower plateau off to the right, that's all the village site. All right. Now this slide is a picture of Mike Yarborough, who is our principal investigator of this excavation. Mike first went to Chernofski in 1998, back with Georgie Reynolds, who used to be the lead USACE archaeologist. So he's been to the site a number of times. In addition to Mike, we had Aubrey Morrison, Dan Thompson, Sammy Schaefer, Amy McCaig, Samantha Dunning, and Roberta Gordroff was able to join too, which was really fantastic. And many of you, I'm sure, know Roberta already. She's a descendant community member, and then she's also currently working on her PhD in archaeology at the University of Tromsø in Norway. So she's doing research on this area as well as the rest of the Aleutians, and I think she's going to be able to incorporate some of these data into her research on her family past. Eric Christensen was also involved in 2019, helping the crew out with water and other important things like that. And you can see here the camp of the archaeologists with all their tents. All right, so I'm going to show you some pictures of how the excavation was going. This is a really good example of what we would call a 1x2, a 1 meter by 2 meter excavation unit. And there were 5 of these excavated on site. And you can see here, there's what we would call a tool cache, maybe in the upper right corner. And you can see we have a north arrow also. Another example of the beginning of an excavation, one of the things we do is we line out the unit to make sure it's all square and nice as we excavate down. And the thing in the front of the photo here is a screen. So all of the dirt excavated by trowels, which is sitting in the screen, is sifted through. So it's removed from the unit, from the excavation, placed in the screen, and then shook to make sure that no artifacts or faunal remains are missed. Here's an example of Haley McCaig and Samantha Dunning screening at excavation unit number 1. And here's an example of Dan Thompson and Aubrey Morrison screening at excavation unit number 4. So excavation and then a lot of screening. That's archaeology, at least this kind. So these are some really great shots of what we call a wall profile. So this is the eastern wall of excavation unit number 4. And the really exciting thing about this is you can see all the different layers, all the different occupation layers going down into the ground. The row of rocks, for example, that's a floor of a house. And then you can see, for example, like towards the bottom of the unit, there's a bunch of sea urchin needles, sea urchin spines and fish bone coming out. And but you'll hear archaeologists use the term midden or shell lens to describe that type of layer where it's primarily animal bone that's compacted into layers. Here's another example of a wall profile. The exciting thing here, not only the amazing stratigraphy, you can see where folks have, in the past dug down to create different features within the site, but that large object towards the base of the unit is a large whale bone, probably a mandible, a jawbone of a whale. It was left in place and they excavated around it, which is really hard to do. So I was really impressed when I saw this photo. But it's exciting to see evidence of large whale. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So the excavation happened in 2019 at the end of the summer. And I should say, all of the materials were excavated from Tanagusic Corporation land, so TDX does own all of the materials, and we will be giving the materials back to TDX once the analysis is complete, or accessioning them to a repository of their choice, maybe Museum of the Aleutians or something like that. Currently, towards the end of 2019 and in 2020, we're in the process of analyzing a representative sample of all of the artifacts and animal bones, faunal remains that were recovered from the site, from those 10 square meters. And the crew is working at labs in Anchorage and Fairbanks. So these labs are secure and they're safe places. Some of the Anchorage-based community members were able to come and see the labs, do a tour of the labs in the fall of 2019, which was really nice. These boxes that you can see in this picture are all full of animal bones. So, or almost all of them are full of animal bones from Chernofski. So it's a really large collection. And there's a very large group of people working on the analyses, and I'll go into detail more on that in a minute. Okay, so I'm going to go
Hey, Kelly.
Oh, yeah.
Kelly, I'm sorry for interrupting, but there's a lot of background noise, so if the people that have phones could please mute your cell phone, and if you don't have a cell phone, I believe you can press, what is it?
Oh, *6, is that it?
*6 to mute and unmute, because we can hear a lot of background noise, and it's kind of hard to hear you.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. No, that's really helpful. And let me just check and open up the participants list. Yeah, it looks like a lot of folks on the phone are having trouble muting. But I think we're good. All right, let me go back to the other screen. Okay, moving forward. So the faunal remains analysis, which is the animal bones, which is a great love of mine. That's my background, is looking at animal bones. So far, what the folks doing the analyses have found are whale, sea lion, seal, sea otter, fox. Birds include ducks, geese, loons, alcids like murres and puffins, gulls, and the fishes include the cod, halibut, salmon, greenling, atka mackerel, and sculpin, with cod being the largest type of fish represented. So most of the fish bones seem to be cod so far. And the two people doing that analysis are Aubrey Morrison and Liz Ortiz. So they're working really hard on that. and as you can tell from a comparison look of what the midden material, that those animal bones look like at the site on the top where cattle footprints have kicked away the vegetation and made it more visible, and then the types of sorting trays that we use in the lab to organize the bones as we try and identify the species they belong to. And so once the initial identification of species is done on all of these animal bones, the archaeologists will be looking at things like cut marks, what bones were cut, where were they cut, what does that indicate of skinning practices, and they'll also be looking at things like changes in the types and amounts of animals being hunted over time. So were there more cod being hunted earlier on during the site occupation when people were living there, or were there more salmon, things like that. It can be a lot of really neat subsistence information about what people were eating and hunting and how they were interacting with their environment. All right, osseous tool analysis. So osseous being bone or ivory. There were a lot of really, really exciting tools that were recovered. In terms of type, debitage was the most common, and debitage being those small bits and pieces left over from carving a tool or object. And the person doing the primary analysis of osseous tools right now is Haley McCaig. All right, and here's a showpiece. It's really exciting. This is a fragment of a carved ivory plate that would have covered the back of a bentwood hat. And from what we've been told, it's probably the first example of one being recovered from an archaeological site ever, which is really exciting. The lithics analysis, looking at the stone tools. Again, similar to the osseous tools, debitage is the most common type, that the small bits of pieces that are broken off while you're actually creating the tool. Chert is the most common material in the older levels, and then as you go closer to the surface, obsidian becomes more common. Historical artifacts, some of the trade goods that were found, and those are mostly being analyzed by Dan Thompson, include Chinese hand-painted trade porcelain dating to the late 1700s and early 1800s, the red cornelian de Aleppo Venetian beads, brass gears for a parlor clock. You can see one example here. English transferware ceramics with known dates associated with them, and then other types of beads like these white beads here. All right, so as I had mentioned earlier, we were really interested both here at USACE and our consulting parties as trying to figure out how long have people been living at Chernofski. And although we weren't able to get to the very deepest portion of the site, we were able to recover some charcoal, which we sent in for radiocarbon dating through AMS, which is accelerator mass spectrometry dating. And then the oldest date, which was found, at 400 centimeters below datum, was about 3,000 years old. So that was really exciting to get that date back and have really good proof that, 3,000 years of occupation is a really, really long time. So it's a really exciting result from that test. And on for those of you who pay attention to those types of things, the calibrated date on the right-hand side of that table was calibrated with int cal 13. All right, so I'm going to wrap up here pretty quickly. In addition to all of the work that was done at the Chernofski Village site, I wanted to give you guys a brief overview of some of the types of recordation things that we did at some of those World War II features that I had mentioned earlier. And that included, like, this is the kitchen, one of the old mess halls behind the slaughterhouse there. And with drone imagery and, again, this terrestrial digital elevation model, we were able to get really good documentation of what that looks like now. For the garage, this is the sunken grease pit associated with a World War II garage. We were able to do drone imagery. So in addition to the models, we got drone imagery and some 3D models too, which I wasn't able to incorporate into this presentation, but those will be available later on. And things like this. So the fuel tank farm was removed. So we have pictures of before the tank removal and then after the tank removal. Again, those tanks are a source of contamination that we want to make sure stays out of the environment or is removed from the environment. All right, and then the archaeological monitoring that occurred after the excavation work with that archaeology crew. Michael Yarborough stayed on as the monitor for the work, the cleanup work, including that tank removal effort. And so he monitored that and made sure everything was going well. He didn't find any significant artifacts that were impacted, no human remains, thankfully no burials during the monitoring, and then no historic properties that were unintentionally or unexpectedly impacted. All right, so that's the end of my presentation. Do people want to do questions right now, or do you guys want to wait until maybe the end of everybody's presentation? I think Mike McMillan is going to be up next.
Hey, Kelly.
Yes.
For that great presentation. You know, I don't know if anybody wants to ask any questions, so if you have any questions, just feel free to jump in at any time. But would you mind going to the next slide?
Oh, yep. Give me 1 sec. All right. Mike, I'm going to mute myself just to avoid distortion. So.
Okay. There's just kind of an overview of the entire site back when the military was starting their construction there. And, you know, Chernofski Harbor was actually built because, you know, in 1941, the Army began building Fort Glenn, which is on the neighboring island. And they decided that Chernofski Harbor was the nearest natural harbor that sits on the west end of Unalaska. So in 1942, Chernofski Harbor was constructed to support Fort Glenn. They only used it until 1945 because the harbor was no longer needed at that point. And next slide, please. So we did two separate, well, there's 8 projects total out there that we completed in 2019. There were 5 Con HTRW projects and 3 HTRW projects. And I just received the final reports today, so I will get those out to the stakeholders and landowners and interested parties as soon as we vet them. But the different projects were the Con HTRW projects. The 5 of them were transformer projects where we removed 12 transformers and sampled around them. Project 5 was grease pit, batteries, and paint cans, where we sampled where batteries and paint cans had been found previously. Another project was a 55-gallon drum project where 37 drums were removed and sampled. And then as Kelly showed you the pictures, there was an AST, which is above ground storage tank. There was an AST's east and an AST's west, and between the two sites, 20 tanks were removed. There was also a site investigation where we sampled 13 buildings. Of those collapsed buildings, the most probably highly contaminated buildings, which would be like, mechanic shops or generator rooms. We sampled as many of those as we could. There were some issues with sampling them because we want to try to, at least maintain the integrity of the buildings for historical purposes as much as possible, but we're working through that to hopefully sample more buildings in the future. There was also a power pole project where we sampled for PCBs, and then a landfill project where we sampled for any contaminants that might be leaching onto the beach. As you can guess, we did, in addition to that, we did some UVO sampling, which is ultraviolet optical screening tools, where we drill a probe down into the ground to sort of detect any fuel spills, and it'll give us the depth and the extent of those fuel spills, so we can map those sites out to see what we're going to do with that fuel in the future. And we did 362 different locations. I think it was we drilled down total with all 362 locations. It was almost a half a mile. We went in depth combined, but as you can guess, we did find contamination out there. Some places were better, some places were worse, and we're right now preparing a contract to hopefully get back out into the field in 2022 to continue the investigation and cleanup activities out at Chernofski Harbor. And that's about all I have. So if anybody has any questions, feel free.
Hi, Mike. Was the contractor decided, or is the RFP not out yet? This is Karen.
Oh, it's not out yet. It hasn't been decided.
And sorry for the screen, everybody. I'm trying to get back to the meeting so I can unmute myself and say thank you, Mike, for the presentation. And then I think next up we have Jeremy. Jeremy, are you ready?
I'm ready, Kelly. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep, coming through loud and clear.
Great. Well, awesome job on your presentation, Kelly. You have really cool pictures, and they're very interesting. I've learned a lot. So my plan today is to talk to everybody about two properties in the kind of nearby vicinity, that we've been cleaning up environmental contamination left behind by World War II activities. Again, we're working under the formerly used Defense Sites FUDS program. And so the first property I'm going to talk about is Fort Glenn. We're just kind of getting started cleaning up Fort Glenn. I'll go into detail a little bit about that. The second property I'm going to talk about is Cape Prominence. And Cape Prominence, we did a couple years of field work out there, and we plan to, we pretty much cleaned it up, and we plan to close it out in the next year or so. So my goal is just to kind of give you guys a brief overview, not get into too many details, but again, please feel free to ask questions, as things come up, if you'd like. So Kelly, if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So Fort Glenn is a formerly used defense site, and I'm not sure if everybody can see this very well, but the gist of it is, Fort Glenn is on Amaknak Island. It encompasses a very large part of the eastern side of the island, roughly 100,000 acres, and which is just big, right? It's immense. There's 4 main landowners out there: TDX, St. George Tanah, state property, which is where the main airfield lies, is DOT state property, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service property on the far west side. So that kind of where the main airfield is the orange outline, kind of looks like a little bit of a triangle kind of towards the middle where you see a lot of white lines there. You can't see what's going on. That's kind of where the main airfield is. And then there's a satellite airfield to the north and another satellite airfield to the south. Kelly, could you go to the next slide, please? So yeah, just some general information about Fort Glenn. It was, like I think Kelly or Mike said earlier, Chernofski was kind of the hub where things were brought into, and then things were brought over from Chernofski to Fort Glenn, and Fort Glenn was kind of a big deal, at the time. It operated as an air base for a couple years. It included all branches of the military, including almost 10,000 officers, enlisted personnel, civilian employees. Like I said before, there's one main airfield and two satellite airfields, one to the north, one to the south. There's over 700 buildings were constructed, and many, tanks, pipelines, 55-gallon drum piles. There's some leftover equipment and a bunch of other cool, things out there. And it's a really interesting place. I've been working on it for a handful of years, so I'm always learning new stuff about Fort Glenn. Another kind of interesting fact out there that people don't know is that there's a ranch, Bering Pacific Ranches operates a cattle ranch, complete with lodging facilities and other, ranching type facilities, slaughter facilities. Well, I think they used to have old slaughter facilities. I think they ship off the cattle anymore, but they also serve as it's kind of a tourist destination. People can go out there and stay and then go look at all the cool old military stuff out there. These are just a couple photos of some tanks out there, some tank pairs where we have some in really good condition to the left, and then some that are obviously not in very good condition, and then stuff in between and all different types of tanks. So next slide, please. And Fort Glenn is a designated National Historic Landmark. This is what you're seeing here, this picture aerial from 1943 is the main airfield. You can see kind of the three different runways there, somewhat in different states of. It looks like maybe the lower one or the one to the south, one to the west might be under construction. But I guess we could talk all types of stuff about National Historic Landmarks. The main thing I want to bring up is that we're doing additional coordination with the National Park Service and other folks, the SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office at the state, to make sure that, the work that we do out there is, in coordination with everybody and that everybody kind of knows what we're going on. And we've had some great meetings in the past. I would like to have some more meetings here recently, but of course we haven't really been able to, but this might be a good venue to, do some other meetings with some other folks to talk about, projects, Fort Glenn, whatever. Next slide, please. So within, I don't know how much, most people probably don't know that much about FUDS maybe, but there are multiple different types of projects with FUDS within the FUDS program. And we kind of categorize projects, based on kind of features or different types of things. And I just kind of wanted to bring that up. So out at Fort Glenn, we have, have a MMRP projects out there, military munitions, where we focus on munitions. We have containerized waste type projects. We have HTRW projects that kind of focus a little bit more on, investigations. The containerized waste focuses on containerized waste, I guess, obviously, things like drums and tanks, pipelines, stuff like that. And we have kind of roughly 8 active projects with a few that we're really focusing on, and many more kind of set up, that are kind of in line to be picked up and we'll pick them up and work on those once we get some of these first kind of 4 or 5 projects, taken care of as we close things out. So this is a cool photo of looks like an old grader out there, and a pile of drums, kind of a typical pile of drums out there. Next slide, Kelly, please. So yeah, this is a little bit more detail about some of the projects that we're really actively focusing on right now. We have a bit kind of a package of ConHRW projects. It consists of drums as one project, tanks and pipelines as a project, transformers as a project, and equipment as a project. And we've started to go down the CERCLA Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act process, which is a pretty formal process to jump through to kind of keep things moving along and everybody informed of what's going on. And we are going to have some more public meetings soon. We have several planned where people will be able to, give their public, throw out some ideas, respond to some of the general plans that we'll have, make comments, and we'll be able to incorporate those as we can. So this kind of package of ConHRW projects, we plan to start cleanup work in 2022. We're still in what they call the ECA kind of phase of work, where we just got some work. We have some ECA documents that we're working on to kind of figure out what our options are, what might be the best options to kind of start with. And one other, really major project that we worked on this last summer was at the open burn, open detonation area, which is an MMRP project. We did a big remedial action this past summer. We didn't get everything cleaned up. We're going to remob back out there in 2021 and plan to clean everything up during that time. So this is a great photo of some of the UXO techs doing a surface clearance sweep of the surface during that OBOD area removal or remedial action. Next slide, please. So yeah, that kind of wraps up Fort Glenn. I'm going to move on to Cape Prominence. And thank you, Kelly. Perfect. So Cape Prominence is located on Unalaska Island. It's roughly 35 miles southwest on Unalaska. You can kind of see where it is in relation to, Dutch Harbor. And the main property is the purple area shaded to the right. And it's on U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service land. I think that's all I have to say. I'll kind of try to keep moving along here. Next slide, please. So Cape Prominence was an aircraft warning service station that was really, used to detect, aircraft or, enemy aircraft as it passes through the airspace. Pretty interesting site as well. And we've done quite a few different types of investigations, and then also some removals out there, which we'll get into next. Next slide, please. So, like I said, Cape Prominence was an aircraft warning station. These are just some great photos that we have, in our archives. This photo from the upper camp area, they're raising the radar tower. And then this other photo to the right is a tramway that connects the upper camp with the lower camp. And there'll be some more photos on that. So construction, between 1942 and 1943, it was in operation from 43 to 45. The tramway is 2,400 feet long. It's quite the tram out there that they were able to build. Pretty impressive. And specifically, it was an SCR-271 fixed radar camp that was established at the upper camp. So yeah, and I think another kind of that ties into Chernofski, supplies were barged there from Chernofski. So next slide, please. So kind of the timeline of work out at Cape Prominence kind of gives you a little idea on how long it takes to do, kind of work through things and, get some actual stuff done out at one of our one of our projects. So initial investigations were, early to late 1990s. We kind of had a real formal site investigation that we conducted in 2017. I was a part of that. And then we did a removal action in 2019. We didn't get all the dirty dirt and other stuff that was out there, so we had to go back this last summer and wrap it up for another kind of second round removal action. So some of the features of work and things that we were actually doing out there, we removed petroleum and low-level mercury contaminated soil at both the upper and lower camps. We removed 55-gallon drums, fluids, drum remnants, above-ground storage tanks and fluids, underground storage tanks and fluids, for kind of a grand total of 1,400 tons of contaminated soil and roughly 4,300 tons of metallic debris. That was after both years of work. This photo is a picture of the helicopter. They had to sling bags of contaminated soil from the upper camp down to the lower camp to the beach. Next slide, please. Here's kind of an overview of along the beach where we had kind of some lay down work camp staging areas. The left one's 2019. You can see a lot of bags of soil there, some connexes. The one in 2020, this was probably a picture taken before we had a lot of bags accumulated, but still a great photo. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the lower camp that kind of sits down in the valley. So you can see the camp staging area, and then kind of two main features I'll be talking about next are the standby powerhouse and the main powerhouse. That was where we did the majority of our work in both 2019 and 2020. Then you can kind of see relative to the main camp where the tramway lies off to the left there. Next slide, please. So here's some good before and after photos. The main powerhouse was the main power generation for, I believe, both the upper, mainly for the lower camp. The upper camp had their own powerhouses. So before we actually went in, pulled the wood out by hand, we tried to maintain the, archaeological integrity of the revetments, the berms that are around the outer edge, and then we dug out some of the dirty dirt, got rid of a tank or two, and then this is what it looked like after. We put the wood and stuff back into the hole, and hopefully that will revegetate and look nice, hopefully fairly soon. The standby powerhouse was a good before picture in the bottom left here, and kind of did the same thing, pulled out any of the, interesting, World War II related debris, and then off to the right, we dug out some dirty soil and put the wood and other debris back into about, generally where it was at before. And as you'll see in some of these pictures, there's not much left of these buildings. They were pretty wiped out by wind. Next slide, please. At the upper camp, this is a view facing southwest of the upper camp where there were two powerhouses up at the upper camp. You can see their locations and the relation to each other. You can kind of see a couple guys standing down there by the big black circle there towards the middle. Gives you a little idea for scale. Next slide, please. Here's a few more before and after photos of the powerhouse number one. Had a underground storage tank and some other that had either leaked or maybe it leaked from transferring the fluids. We pulled the wood out, removed the soil, put stuff back in. Lower picture, kind of the same story, before and after photos. Next slide, please. Probably one of the coolest things about Cape Prominence is the tramway. It was pretty unique to the construction out there, and across the Aleutians, there weren't very many tramways, and this one's pretty neat. You can see the remnants of it. A lot of it is kind of sunken into the ground, and some of it kind of sticks out. Next slide, please. This is a view looking down from the top of the tramway. You can see some of the rails and kind of how it dives down in the ground. It's a pretty cool photo on the beach, the lower beach, and in the background there. Next slide, please. So this is just to wrap up my time here. There was some really, and things about Cape Prominence. Some new information kind of came about when we did the work out there at Cape Prominence. Forrest Cranda, one of our archaeologists, did the archaeological monitoring, and he kind of pieced together some things while he was out there, and we uncovered some stuff that kind of helped to tell a little bit of the story about why we were seeing what we were seeing out there. So we saw I saw some deviations from the established plans, from the original plans to the actual plans. They had to, just based on the layout, the topography, those types of things, they changed. It was pretty obvious, I think, once we saw some hand pumps and some hoses, that a lot of fuel was delivered with 55-gallon drums, transferred from the 55-gallon drums into some local ASTs or USTs. And, there was obviously some spillage there with that, and I think that contributed to some, maybe extra contamination than maybe what we typically see in some of these smaller, tanks. I think there was some, enhanced defensive, construction and posture where a lot of the, there was some really distinct revetments built around, some of these structures. I think, wind protection from, people being, trying to bomb you or whatever else. So they kind of modified things out there, and a little bit tough to see, but down in the far right corner, you can see some of the artifacts that Forrest uncovered while he was out there and documented and whatnot, some bottles and some other kind of interesting items. And that's it for me. I hope I didn't go too long, Kelly.
No, that was great. Thank you, Jeremy. And next up is going to be Rena Flint. And I do want to interject one thing. As I was sitting here listening to Jeremy, I realized that I forgot to give credit to Hollis Reddington, who's been doing the lithic analysis for Chernofski. So quick kudos to him, and thank you for that analysis work. But moving on to the next topic. Rena, are you ready to go?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, super. Well, good evening, everybody. We have just a few more minutes before 7 o'clock, so I'll try to make this or as quick or short as you want. Hi, my name is Rena. I'm a USACE PM, and I just wanted to give you a brief update on the Amaknak formerly used descent site. Next slide, please, Kelly. So I'd like to start with an overview map of the Amaknak FUDS to give you an idea of the area that I'm talking about. So this is the area of land formerly withdrawn by the military that constitutes the Amaknak FUDS site. And it's on Amaknak Island and on Unalaska Island. And our objective, of course, similar to everybody else that has presented tonight, is to clean up military impacts from 70 years ago on your land. The military buildup in Unalaska in World War II was huge, with nearly 65,000 personnel stationed there. At the peak of operations, 11 facilities encompassing 190,000 acres. And due to this military buildup, there were hundreds of sites with environmental impacts. For example, many of the buildings each had their own heating oil tank. There were artillery areas, guns mounted at Fort Schwaka on Mount Ballyhoo. There were tank farms, power generation facilities, and utility systems. Next slide, please, Kelly. So much of the Amaknak FUDS is associated with World War II era Dutch Harbor Naval Operating Base and the Fort Mears National Historic Landmark. Fort Brumbach and Fort Schwaka are considered part of the Dutch Harbor Knob and Fort Mears NHL. By 1947, the military completed its withdrawal from the posts, but most facilities were left intact, The Amaknak FUDS includes the Naval Reservation, the Knob, Fort Grumbach, Fort Swampka, and Fort Mears. Next slide, please, Kelly. So I'm really proud of the work that my team has done for more than 30 years at the site. The Corps began debris cleanup in Unalaska in 1984. In 1993, we commenced the investigation and remediation work for chemical contamination, and subsequently began work concerning the containerized hazardous waste in 1994. So extensive investigative and remedial activities have been performed, but there's still more left to do. I've recently organized the remaining Amaknak FUDS environmental impacts into 11 projects, organized by geographic regions, in order to allow for more effective management and community input on the prioritization. Next slide, Kelly. So 2 weeks ago, we kicked off the Amaknak FUDS Restoration Advisory Board. The RAB will advise the remedy and restoration of the site. We polled the community for the support of a formation of a RAB, and we received overwhelming support. But I need your individual commitment to the RAB by returning your membership forms to me. Contact me if you still need a membership form. You can call me 907-753-2680, text me 907-201-3108, or email me. So far I've received only 2 forms. We need 5 to 10 to form the RAB, and we also need a community co-chair. So keep that in mind, all you guys on the phone who would like to be involved. RAB members can represent, any part of the community: private citizens, landowners, community groups, businesses, nonprofits, religious groups, etc. And they'll act as a conduit of information to and from the public. And what we're really looking for is a robust and diverse RAB that's right-sized and productive. And our next meeting, where we will induct our new RAB members and adopt the mission, membership conditions, and operating procedures for our RAB, is tentatively scheduled for March 16th. So please save that date. And once absolutely all RAB meetings are open to the public in addition to the board. Next slide, please, Kelly. And then for the final part of our meeting tonight, we're right at 7. I wanted to provide you a regional perspective and an update on FUDS within your areas of ancestral, cultural, and importance. We'll zoom out twice for 2 regional perspectives. Kelly, if you wouldn't mind, next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to complement the overviews that you've heard tonight with a map of the Fox Island FUDS. These FUDS have both for desktop and or field actions in this year or in the future. And if we have time at the end, I can briefly go through some of the additional actions at this site, but not all are field work. Most are desktop, actually. Next slide. Thanks, Kelly. And this is my final slide. For the broader Aleutian Islands, I just wanted to present to you that we have a diverse and uniquely qualified group of FUDS PMs. We have 22 active formerly used defense sites, meaning active remediation, and we have 9 PMs. And for information about any of these FUDS, please get in touch with me, and I'll put you in touch with the respective PM. And that's all I have for tonight.
Thank you so much, Rena. That was a really, really good overview. I think, are we going to have any questions? I know we're running a little over our 1 hour mark, but thank you everyone for sticking around. Does anybody have questions? If you do, be sure to unmute before you ask. And definitely, if you don't want to raise any questions right now, please do feel free to reach out to us later. Kendall just reminded me that you can definitely type your questions in the chat box as well, if that's easier. She's monitoring the chat for us, so she'll let me and other folks know if there's any specific questions. It sounds like Dan Thompson just noted that he lost audio partway through. So I do want to say that we are recording this, and I'm recording it on my end, and then KUCB is recording it as well for me. Thank you, guys. So we will be able to share this recorded presentation with folks, and you can share it with whomever you want, of course. So with that,
hey, Kelly, this is Dave Gregory.
Hi, Dave.
Hey, Kelly, this is Dave Gregory. Hi, Dave. So I'm wondering if are there any remains of the Chapel of the Epiphany that was in Chernofski?
That's a great question. We can tell there aren't any. We were told through some elder interviews and some archival documents that the chapel was taken apart and moved to Kashiga in the 1928 when folks relocated. So we believe the chapel, at least parts of it, were moved to Kashiga. The other issue with the isthmus there at Chernofski is that it looks like there's been a lot of oceanside erosion, and the chapel was on the ocean side of that berm. So if there had been any remnants of the chapel left, part of it might have been eroded away. Although one of the excavation units that was put in place by Mike Yarborough and Dan Thompson and the crew was they used some old maps from the 1900s and from the Russian Orthodox Church maps to try and figure out where the building would have sat, and they tried to put one of the excavation units near that. So we might find out a little bit more as the analysis proceeds.
Great, thank you very much.
And regarding the finishing this analysis, our timeline right now for the Chernofski archaeology, we're hoping to get the report done towards the end of 2021 next year. COVID-19, we were hoping to do it quicker, but COVID-19 has really slowed things down in order to take proper precautions in the lab and make sure that there's not too many people crowded in there. So we're hoping middle or end of 2021, and then that report will be shared with all of our signatories and consulting parties to that MOA, including Unalaska Corporation. Any other questions? And Karen just mentioned that it'd be a good idea to make this an annual event, and I agree with her, especially since KUCB has the possibility of broadcasting this. It's really cool technology that I didn't know existed until Kawalungan Tribe pointed it out. So, Karen, I think we'll definitely be hoping to do something like this again in an annual fashion. Good point. And then I think Tim said something. Yep, and at least 3,000 years. I'm sorry, I'm just reviewing some of the comments. Karen, you had said at least 3,000 years, and that's right. We weren't able to collect charcoal from the lowest parts of the site. So there are definitely, cultural occupations below that 3,000-year-old date. So time immemorial. There's a reason that term exists. All right. Any other questions? Kendall, did I miss any? Oh, it sounds like we're having some audio issues too. She's lost audio as well. I think that's the technology gods telling me that we should probably end it now. If we didn't answer one of your questions, or if you have a comment you'd like to share with us, please do contact us. You should have received a PDF of this presentation. It does have some of our contact information, including phone numbers and emails. So don't hesitate to contact us. And with that, I want to say thank you so much, everybody, for participating. Thank you, Q-Tribe and KUCB, for making this happen. And yeah, everybody have a wonderful night and stay safe.